Oh, look at the time. Look at my glasses. It must be time for Legal AF After Dark. The 5-4 decision by the United States Supreme Court to go forward with the sentencing of Donald Trump, to have him indelibly branded as a felon, is not so much about the fact that they did allow the sentencing to go forward. It's about the makeup of the 5-4. It's about Amy Coney Barrett sliding over to join the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court, and why she did it, what it means about Amy Coney Barrett, the rise of Amy Coney Barrett as the right centrist on the court. This could well become the Amy Coney Barrett court, the way it was the Kennedy court, or the way it was the Sandra Day O'Connor court, where she ends up being the swing vote on all important matters. I'm not extolling the virtue of her, but I will explain it to you along with Ben Meiselas on our most recent episode of Legal AF. Take a listen.
So Supreme Court 5-4 decision against Donald Trump when Trump tried to block his sentencing. The sentencing ended up taking place on Friday. Recall, Donald Trump tried to block sentencing at the trial court level before Justice Merchan, denied. At the appellate division level, denied. At the New York highest court level, which they call the Court of Appeals. They call their Supreme Court the Court of Appeals in New York, which just makes things confusing. And their lower court's called the Supreme Court. Go figure. Anyway, New York's top court, they reject Donald Trump. Trump goes to the Supreme Court, 5-4 decision. You have Justice Amy Coney Barrett and you have Justice John Roberts joining with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Kagan, and Justice Sotomayor. Those last three justices that I mentioned were appointed by Democratic administrations. Justice John Roberts was appointed by George W. Bush. Coney Barrett was appointed by Donald Trump when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. We saw in Amy Coney Barrett, she actually joined with some of the justices who were very critical of the 14th Amendment Section 3 case as well. Remember back in March of 2024 when the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that Colorado could not disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot, but then they divided on what the 14th Amendment Section 3 meant. The Supreme Court's majority went a step further, and they said that actually it's not self-executing. Congress needs to pass a law if you want to do a disqualification. Coney Barrett joined again with Ketanji Brown Jackson, with Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor, and they said, whoa, why are you shutting the door to other ways of dealing with the 14th Amendment Section 3? You're going way too far here. We agree that Colorado couldn't do the disqualification, although states can disqualify state officials. States can't disqualify federal officials. All the Supreme Court justices said, but why are you going out of your way to help Donald Trump in ways that aren't even part of the briefing? So you saw that coalition form there with Coney Barrett being kind of peeled off there. One point I want to make is Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she was a professor at Notre Dame Law School. Her whole thing was getting rid of Roe v. Wade. That was her life's work. If you read her readings, you knew that she was ultimately going to do everything in her power to get rid of Roe v. Wade. We can hate that. We can despise that. We can be as critical as that as we want to be. And we are here on the Midas Touch Network and on Legal AF. But as it relates to other issues, Michael Popok, she was not really in that Federalist Society kind of clique. That's not her crew. She seems to be very uncomfortable after Donald Trump kind of paraded her around when he selected her and brought her to the White House, and kind of that real creepy display and kind of, the way he just strutted her out was very strange. And I think she's always been resentful of that. And I think she doesn't really like Donald Trump, if I'm being totally blunt, reading between the lines and seeing some of the times she's spoken at places. So can she be joining now at some of the other justices? And is Justice John Roberts, remember last week, this is why you got to watch all the Legal AFs. We talked to you about that report that Justice John Roberts wrote, that annual report where he talked about the threats to the judiciary, and he seemed to basically be subtweeting or subposting or basically talking about Donald Trump, disinformation, threats of violence and intimidation, not enforcing the Supreme Court's will and the Supreme Court's order. Is he standing up right now and saying, look, we gave you a lot. We gave you absolute immunity. We ruled on your favor, 14th Amendment Section 3. We've given you a lot of what we wanted as the Federalist Society in terms of, getting rid of the Chevron doctrine, essentially getting rid of the Lemon Test, separation of church and state, really neutering the ability of agencies to do work. But don't go a step further. We've done that. If you start going there, we will rule against you. Was he sending a message? So Popok, I want you to talk about the sentencing because I'm not talking about, you'll cover that aspect. But I think before you talk about what actually went down in the sentencing after Trump lost in the Supreme Court, which opened up the sentencing to take place, I think that dynamic is an interesting one that we're going to see over and over. So I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, and on Unprecedented, the show that Dina Dahl and I are doing on the Legal AF channel, we're going to get our unprecedented week look at the Supreme Court up, I think, today. One of the things that I outline is, and we started from last year, is the rise of Amy Coney Barrett, centrist, right center. And we said, keep an eye on Amy Coney Barrett throughout the rest of this term and beyond, as she kind of comes into her own. Sure, she sided with the majority in the immunity decision and a number of other decisions that we don't like, especially as it relates to church and state, especially as it relates to reproductive rights. She was not a reliable vote for women or for secularism or the separation of church and state. But now that we've gotten some of those out of the way, she is, it appears to be willing on a number of occasions to not only side with the Democratic wing of the Supreme Court, but also to chastise and take on Alito and Thomas and even Gorsuch now, who's becoming a reliable third vote over on the alt-right extreme of the Supreme Court. I'm talking about Gorsuch there. So Amy Coney Barrett criticized a number of things that Clarence Thomas has been using, like gun control. She didn't like the way he's using historical precedent to kind of bind the court to 1800 thinking, and attacked him for that. So we saw the beginnings of this. And we also thought that relationships get formed on the Supreme Court, and that perhaps because the only other three women on the court are on the Democratic wing, that maybe there'd just be some natural affinities that would develop over time, being the four women on there. And whatever the combination of reasons are, we are now seeing what I think is the rise of the Amy Coney Barrett court. And every time we have a centrist or even the last 50 years, it's a Republican. Because look, it's been Republican controlled for over 75 years. The unbroken string of Republican presidents for a long time, and then a couple of others and Democrats. We had a long block of just Republican presidents picking the Supreme Court for most of my young adulthood. On the Amy Coney Barrett side, or the centrist side, let's start with Sandra Day O'Connor, right? But she's center. Then we get Kennedy. It became sort of the Kennedy court for a long time because his fifth vote mattered. He was in the majority more than any other Supreme Court justice for the bulk of his tenure there. But he was to the right of Sandra Day O'Connor. And now if Amy Coney Barrett becomes the one who votes in the majority with most of the decisions, making her the swing vote, she's to the right of Kennedy. So we're watching the center right going further right, of course. But if I'm a Supreme Court advocate, I got to aim for Amy Coney Barrett. I said last week when it came to TikTok and sentencing that it's going to be Amy Coney Barrett on sentencing, trying to bring Roberts over, not to touch the immunity decision another time. He's already circling the drain of history for the first time he touched it, and bring them over to the Democratic wing. I thought Kavanaugh maybe, but he's becoming a foregone conclusion to side with Gorsuch more than he sides with the majority on opinions like this. So I think you're right about Amy Coney Barrett, and we'll see it also in the TikTok when we give our review and analysis of the oral argument about the TikTok ban, because she was very vocal and very active there. I'm not saying, though, I don't want the impression to be that I'm a huge supporter of Amy Coney Barrett or, she's covering herself in glory with a lot of these decisions. She's not. And the intellectual heavyweight among the court for me of newly appointed justices is Ketanji Brown Jackson. But the problem is Ketanji Brown Jackson is on the Democratic wing that only has 3 people. And you got to count to 5 in order to have anything happen on the Supreme Court. So in the sentencing, the way that all backed up there is Look, this should have been, Dina Dahl was right when I talked to her yesterday. This should have been 9-0 against Donald Trump. Welcome back. This is the kind of deep things that we dive into every week, twice a week on Midas Touch's Legal AF, full-length podcast, 5 years in the making. I've been there since the beginning. I founded it with Ben Meiselas, and then we do hot takes about every hour on law and politics, both here and on the Legal AF YouTube channel. If you know about Legal AF already, thank you for being part of our audience. If you don't know about us, that's a clip. And I invite you, Michael Popok personally, to join us for our next live recording on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. And then pick us up wherever you get audio podcasts from. So until my next Legal AF, whether here or on the Legal AF YouTube channel, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.